Welcome to the Healers Café, conversations on health and healing with Dr. Manon.
Remember back in the 90s when Fen came out? Remember that?
Yeah.
Okay, I had this visceral feeling, like this gut feeling, like this was a real bad thing. I just knew it, and it was just like, and I just watched it unfold and pretty much, become not a really good thing. I had the same visceral response when the vaccine came out.
So, welcome to the Healers Café. And today I have with me Dr. Dolores Fazzino. She's an RN, a nurse practitioner, a medical intuitive, and also an energy whisperer. Now, such a long bio. I'm going to just say that she's assisted over 18,500 surgical procedures and has helped people in ways that they never thought possible. She's also worked with Dr. Bernie Siegel, and you've written, I don't know how many books. You have your own program. I'm just going to start the conversation and just welcome you. And yeah, my first question to you is, how did all this get started? Did you just know you're going to be in the health field?
Oh, man, and it's just an interesting story. Believe it or not, I was on a career choice of being a concert clarinetist of all things. In the 11th hour, that shifted and changed once I witnessed miraculous healing of my father's chronic illness. And, I'm going to back up a little bit because people sometimes, the story has a lot of juicy parts to it. I was born into a household where my mom was a product of an alcoholic upbringing. So her MO was, if anything, she didn't like to feel at all. She would internalize her feelings or ignore them. They would go away. I was born an empath, intuitive, and a highly sensitive person. And so I'm in my 60s now. So this goes back, like the early 1960s, and where everybody, children were seen and not heard. You weren't allowed to have a voice. You were pretty much programmed into the white picket fence and what would everybody else think.
Yeah, and Dr. Spock, right?
Oh
Electric
my God, yes.
Spock.
But anyway, so I felt things at a very deep level. My mom, not so much. And her MO for me was ignore it, it'll go away. And when I would tell her that, I noticed that it wasn't going away, it was actually getting bigger because what you ignore persists and grows, right?
Mhm.
So for me, my emotions, I really took to music, and I was able to express my emotions, which I couldn't verbalize through music. So I really excelled at that. And in tandem with that, and when I was in second grade, my dad threw his back out, had to have back surgery, went to the hospital, had that, picked up a hospital acquired infection in the mid
Yeah.
1960s, which back then was considered a death sentence because they didn't have the modern day equipment or also the medications, the antibiotics that would assist that. My dad, this was 1966, was on his deathbed pretty much. He did recover. He was in the hospital for over 2 months. He came home and things were fine for 4 years until 1970, when it seemed like when his immune system would get compromised, this whole sequela that
Mhm.
happened for 2 months would reoccur.
Right.
So he would go back in the hospital, have to have surgery, have abscesses through his abdomen, have to, be on his deathbed. So that happened starting in 1970 for four separate times.
Jeez.
So my childhood was like this emotional roller coaster because I didn't know whether or not my father was going to make it out of the hospital or if he would, die. And I couldn't feel. And so, flash forward to 1975, the fourth time that this was happening, my mom was at her wit's end. I don't know how she survived what she survived, but it was very challenging. So, she was reading about alternative healing modalities because what they had offered my father was in 1975, the CAT scanner first got developed. So they put my dad under the CAT scanner and they found where his problem was stemming from was where he had his original back surgery in 1966.
Hmm.
So their solution was that he would have to have an extensive back surgery called a spinal fusion, which in 1975 was in its neophyte stages of development,
Mhm.
which came with lots of risks. You could die, you could be paralyzed, you may get better, you may not get better. My mom didn't want to have anything to do with that, so she started looking for other answers. And I crack up when I talk about this because, 1975, there was no internet, there was no Google
That's
search,
right.
no
Yeah.
Google, nothing. We had the National Enquirer.
Yeah.
So that's where a lot of lay people would read and get information. So in the National Enquirer, my mom found this article that was written. It was a feature article about this Reverend Alex Holmes from Carroll, Michigan, who had the ability of doing laying on of hands and healing.
Mhm.
He's been doing this type of work since the 1950s, and he's been featured because he assisted his brother from healing from leukemia.
Mhm.
So my mom was all over this, like, butter on bread. My dad, not so much, because my dad was like, only if the surgeon, agreed
Right.
to it. He's the biggest skeptic. So it just so happened at this time of this discussion, my dad was in the hospital being worked up. My mom marched down to the nurse's station where the surgeon, my dad's surgeon, was sitting, and he was writing notes. And my mom announced to the surgeon, I'm thinking about having a spiritual healer come in to assist my husband. Would that be okay? Surgeon's writing, looks up, doesn't miss a beat, said, sure, that would be fine. So my mom got the blessing from the surgeon, went back, shared that information with my dad. My dad was on board. Not 10 minutes went by, man. And what had happened was my mom went back out to the desk, same doctor, same surgeon sitting there, made the announcement to the surgeon saying, my husband agreed to have the spiritual practitioner come in to assist him. The surgeon stopped what he was doing, looked up at her. What are you talking about? I never agreed to that. So
Um,
this is how the universe was starting to set this up. A
yeah.
month later, of course, my mom didn't share that piece of information with my father.
Of course.
A
Yeah.
month later, Reverend Holmes came from Carroll, Michigan to Connecticut, where I grew up, where my other siblings, I have a brother and two sisters, and my two grandmothers were there. And, Reverend Holmes was there. My dad was barefoot, and I don't know how Reverend Holmes knew that my dad had a leg length discrepancy. There was like a 1 inch gap. If you put, his feet up against a book, you could see that. My
Mhm.
dad, was barefoot. He didn't have his slippers or anything that had a lift there, but somehow the minister knew this.
Mhm.
So he had my dad lift both his legs while he was sitting, and of course there was a 1 inch gap. Had him lower his legs, started praying over my father, touched his solar plexus and the crown chakra, said some scripture quotes. Not 2 or 3 minutes went by, and he said, okay, put both your feet up, or both your legs up, and they were both the same length.
Mhm.
In that moment, my life changed forever. I knew that it was my mission in my lifetime to bridge the physical with the spiritual and the invisible with the visible. And
Mhm.
it was my job to go into healthcare to do that.
Mhm.
So that's how I became where I'm at now. My father had another half an hour of work done with the minister. My father also was sobbing like a baby because, remember, he was the biggest skeptic on earth.
Right.
And he
Yeah.
needed to have witness that something was actually happening.
Mhm.
After a half an hour more with the minister, he was instructed to lie down and rest because, as we know, when we do massive energy work, everything's getting rewired and
Yeah.
reformulated. He slept for over 24 hours. He
Wow.
went back a month later to the CAT scanner, found no evidence of the infection, never had to have the surgery, never had to revisit that problem ever again in his lifetime. And he passed away about 12 years ago at the age of 80.
Wow. That's quite the story.
It's the story. And that's, that's where I'm at.
Yeah. Well,
So
it is this, I mean, we're in the era of this thing, this timing where, we can see that this biological or purely physical approach
mhm,
goes to a point,
right.
but it doesn't go beyond that point, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's not this or that. It can be mixed. It's,
Absolutely.
you have to follow the patient and a little bit their comfort zone, or like your mom did, a kind of,
Well,
compromise.
man, and it's really interesting because I think you and I both could agree. It's like the current medical model really focuses on, you know, giving a pill procedure and constantly doing that. Whereas I think the newer medical model needs to be like this big pie. In the middle is health and wellness, and every slice of that pie is a different modality, inclusive of Western medicine, because I feel that there's so many different possibilities and choices, but yet everybody's so uniquely different.
Mhm.
We could have the same physical problem, okay, on the top, the tip of the iceberg, but everybody's way of getting there through their emotions, their beliefs, their connectedness to the cells is
Yeah.
so different that Western medicine does a huge disservice, I feel, by thinking that everybody's created it the same way and they treat it that way, and that's not so.
Yeah. No, I would concur.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been, I mean, I've seen that now. I've been in practice 30 years until I had to give up my license for political reasons, right? Because I did not, because I'm an honest person, really, because I believe in,
Well, you call a spade a spade.
yeah, and
Yeah,
if you're not to do any harm, you can't start doing harm for no reason, so,
agreed.
so
Totally
it's
agree.
like, okay, but I so agree, and I'm, though this has been very difficult few years, it's been I feel very much like what you're explaining. We're really on the precipice of many more people knowing that there's more,
Yeah, I
and
totally agree.
I had like a tagline in my office is for people who know there's more. That was my tagline.
I love that. That's awesome.
And I'm thinking, this is the time. Then no one knew what I was talking about. Very few. I mean, there were some that had done their
Yeah.
work, but a lot of people like, okay, whatever, that's cute, but it's the truth now, right? It's
Oh, it is. And, I think people are waking up. It's about the self-awareness part.
yes,
It's like, I know for me, I tell people once you wake up, you can't go back to sleeping.
right, right,
It's like you just can't.
yeah,
So I think, there's been a lot of people like probably you and I who've been awake for a while. The next wave is here. And I think it's, during COVID that awakened a lot of people. So
yeah,
it's like the people who are awake are awakening and still asleep. And there's always going to be people who are still asleep. And that's
yeah,
just the way it is.
yeah.
And, for whatever reason, whatever their soul's mission is, maybe
Hmm.
they need to be asleep. Who knows? But,
Hmm.
I feel that we're in a time where it's about people taking their power back, learning
Yeah,
how to trust their intuition, which we've been told is baloney or quackery, which is actually our sovereign right as a human being. Okay. And to learn how to trust that no matter what's going on
yeah,
and not give your power away to other things outside of yourself, inclusive of Western medicine or the people in the white coats. And I could say this because I'm Western medicine trained and I bridge both worlds. And I feel that Western medicine has a tendency to hide behind evidence based, which
right,
is
yeah,
a bunch of malarkey. Because I have a doctorate in nursing, I did clinical research, and I
yeah.
know about statistics and how they're manipulated and stuff.
Mhm.
I remember having a very interesting conversation with an anesthesia colleague of mine, probably about 10 years ago. He said, Dolores, the stuff that you practice isn't evidence based. And I said, well, you know what? Let's have a conversation about evidence based medicine.
Mhm.
Help me understand why is it Big Pharma comes out with this new drug, been rushed through FDA approval. It's on the market for like 2 years and then it's taken off with a huge class action lawsuit for all the bad things it does. I said, is that the evidence based medicine that you're talking about?
Mhm.
He didn't know how to respond. And I said, you know what? I've done clinical research, I have a doctorate. And I know statistics are manipulated all the time. And I said, if one person has a good result from what I do, that's enough evidence based for me.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is that if you're, and that's the truth, is if people are getting better, they refer people, and not everything works for everyone. That's
Right.
the truth,
Right.
right? But to I mean, I've looked at so many of the researches, and you can say 50%, more than 50%. Yeah, but there's like 4 people,
Yeah.
it's like, you know, I mean, I don't want to get into the so-called research that happened with some of these so-called vaccines. I mean,
Oh my God.
unbelievable to think that we would not have had access for 75 years, that we couldn't have seen the type of,
Yeah.
I don't know if you can even give it the word research. It's just unbelievable what they
Well,
did.
it is interesting too. And, this was so weird because I remember back in the 90s when Fen came out. Do you remember that?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Okay. I had this visceral feeling, like this gut feeling, like this was a real bad thing. I just knew it. And it was just like, and I just watched it unfold and pretty much, become not a really good thing. I had the same visceral response when the vaccine came out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And I just knew that, no, we can't be doing this. And I know for me, it was a hard no, you're not doing it.
yeah.
And being in healthcare at the time, I got so much pushback. I'm still unvaccinated and
Mhm.
I will never be vaccinated. I,
Yeah.
I just will not.
But did you have to step away from your
Nope.
position? No.
Because in the United States, okay, what was interesting was this. I'm credentialed at different hospitals. They have like a board.
Mhm.
And in the United States, I felt like I was in uncharted territory because for 40 years I had been doing this work. And I know that I have rights as a provider and also as a human being. So I was in uncharted territory, especially when they were mandating X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
So I called a civil rights attorney and I said, what are my rights?
What would your life be like if you were pain-free? If you were one of the millions who suffer from chronic pain, the thought of just one day without it may seem impossible. This is often because conventional medicine tends to fall short in the treatment of pain, opting to prescribe pills or recommend surgery rather than getting to the root cause of the problem. But if you are suffering with emotional or physical pain, there is hope. Join the founder and CEO of Bowen College, Manon Bolliger, live online for your body-mind reboot. Learn how to listen to your symptoms and get to the root cause of your pain. Plus, be trained in basic Bowen therapy moves so that you can reboot your body for optimal health. You don't have to live in pain. You can heal. Stop the pain pill cycle by visiting www.yourbodymindreboot.com to learn more and to register.
And I said, because the institutions, some of them are sending out a document, like a declination that, and it should be either for religion or medical and
Mhm.
nothing further.
Mhm.
But they were asking for all this other information.
Mhm.
And she said, by law, they cannot do that. They can only, give you one sheet to check the box, and that's it. By law, they can't ask any other information because that is called, what do you want to call it? There's a word for it. I can't even remember.
Well, it's out of their domain.
Well,
Like,
yeah, it's out of their
fiction.
right. And so the
Yeah.
thing is, and it's actually discrimination. She said, and they have a lawsuit. I said, that's all the information I need.
Wow.
So
Interesting.
yeah, so that's how I got around it. And I would tell them, I said, it's really none of your concern. Those are, religious for religious beliefs. And the thing is like, it's like, so are you the gatekeeper of who's God and who's not?
Yeah.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it really got to be pretty ugly. In
Yeah.
fact, one hospital had like a 25-page declination form, and I decided, you know what? We're done here. It was like ending a 30-year bad marriage.
Yeah.
And it was so liberating after I said, I'm done.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
walked away. So it's just like, and all these other doors open. So I don't,
No, I do agree. I mean, having also had some special ventures with, diseases and things,
yeah.
that coming out on the other side and seeing the world, very differently, or more actually confirming my intuition. It's not that I thought
Absolutely.
differently,
Yeah.
but
It's like, you know what you know what you know. I
exactly.
mean, yeah,
You can't unknow exactly that.
exactly.
But in Canada, we didn't have the right to have no doctors were allowed to give any reasons why you cannot.
Oh, geez.
Those who did were all actually pursued legally. They will win. We
Yeah.
will all win this because it's a crime what has
Oh,
happened.
yeah.
But yeah, we
Civil
could
liberty infringement. Absolutely. Yeah.
completely, yeah. But at this time, we don't know what kind of government we have, so it may not
I
be the
have news for you. We don't know what kind of government we have here either.
anyway. But let's turn.
It's a universal thing now.
I know. Well, I was thinking when Klaus Schwab was so happy to say how he's infiltrated the Canadian government, and half people are his young leaders. It's like, oh my God, okay, tell me no more, But yeah, so we're not really run by people we've elected, that's for sure, But I
We're
wanted to.
not either, let me tell you.
I know, I've been following. It's amazing in the States, though. It's maybe because there are actually two parties that appear to be fighting against each other. And some people believe that it's really, one or the other rather than the person, the human being, that's speaking. Yeah, a lot more things come out. There's more
Oh, yeah.
whistleblowers. There's more, like in Canada, it's as if we're like one thing, and there's our little politicians. I mean, they try, but they don't really try. They, there's really very little.
Politicians.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, okay, let's turn this around, because part of this is practitioners need to, follow this, hear this, regain their dignity, their sense of empowerment, their own right. And a lot of them have made choices that based on, it's authority, and of course they know what they're doing, the CDC, and they would never lie to us, and our governments would never lie. Big surprise they're gonna
Big
get.
surprise.
But I'm still more concerned about the patients, the ones who couldn't have as easily had access to this, information, and took it because they were, forced to, or they would lose their jobs or whatever.
I think a lot of times it was out of fear. They
Oh,
responded out of fear. Yeah.
absolutely. And if you're like 80% of Canadians live, how do you say this? 2 weeks at a time, paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
So
It's like that in the United States too.
yeah. Okay. So we share good things in common. Anyways, but so like you could say that they had a choice, they could have done it differently, but unless it was en masse and people stood together and realized that if it happens to one, it happens to all, it's very hard in that type of pressure. It's an abusive relationship, basically.
Yeah.
It's very hard to stand up and do that difference. There are people who did, and obviously, that's wonderful, but a lot of people got caught in this. And what I want to talk about is, because one of the things when I read a little bit more about you and what you've seen in your past, people have taken 5 shots. I don't know. I don't even know what I think is possible for them. But those who did the minimum, the 2 shots and woke up or realized that there's a problem. Yeah. And we know the doses are different. We know that they experimented on, that was part of the trial, stage 3, to find out, how people responded to different dosages. If you follow most of the doctors, who have researched this, it sounds like some were truly placebo, but the others, what do you think about the statement that people are ticking time bombs, like that anyone who's taken it, unless they got placebo, is bound to at least a very accelerated, decelerating lifespan, and then there's all those that died, as predicted, right?
Yeah. Well, that's it's an interesting, what you're sharing is very interesting because I know I've witnessed a bunch of stuff. It seems like those who have taken the vaccine that were immunocompromised,
Mhm.
if they were stable in their or remission, it took them out of remission and it created, they got out of remission and then they ended up, getting
But-
their disease and dying.
Right.
I've also noticed that there is people of all ages just dropping dead from cardiac stuff.
Yes.
I've also noticed that, and even personally from my family, that we had a person who was in remission from cancer,
Mhm.
took the 2 vaccines, and a year later he's dead.
Mhm.
So, of course, I have my thoughts on that.
Mhm. Mhm.
And, I even had told this person, a year before he passed that he was getting ready to take the booster. And I said, you may want to rethink that. And he said, what, are you getting political on me? I said, no, I just know a lot of things that I know a lot of stuff. So, that was the whole mentality. Some people were just doing it because it was that, I think, man, and the biggest thing that's so important is that this is where people need to trust their gut, their
Mm.
intuition. You know what? Maybe it is the right thing for them to take. But if you're aligned with that at a soul source, it's making the right choice for you without
Mhm.
having the feedback or the being distracted by the external as you need to do X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
Okay. It being put upon you. No, trust, because we as human beings are wired to heal. Okay.
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
have that healing capability within ourselves.
Mhm.
What happens sometimes is that we distract ourselves from that voice,
Mhm.
okay, by information or how people, you go to the doctors, they have their idea and they project their fears and feelings onto you
Mhm.
of what you could have
Yeah.
and maybe not have. And guess what? You don't have it, but you start believing that and you start creating it for yourself.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
So there's that dance that happens too. And
Yeah.
I've been witness to that personally. And I basically had to say to one doctor, I said, you got to stop this
Mhm. Mhm.
because
But
you're creating things for people that they don't even have.
yeah, I mean, it's a known phenomenon, right? This nocebo effect, right? Like
Yeah.
you could absolutely create things, but what I'm wondering with all the information that's pouring out, I mean, if you're on whatever Twitter X now or whatever,
Yeah.
like it's just files after files, and you're like, oh my goodness, it's
Yeah.
overwhelming.
I think as time goes on, you're going to see more and more stuff being called to the surface and happening. I
Yes.
know. So for me, I think the biggest concern was they really were they were telling people if you're immunocompromised, you need to get it.
Yeah.
And I think that was the worst thing they could have done because if you're immunocompromised, you don't want to be taking that because it'll segue you and it'll tip you over into being, it'll accelerate whatever's going on. If you were on the
You're
cusp
hooked.
of getting
Yeah.
something, it was going to throw you into it.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I mean, that's the turbo cancers and all the degenerative
Yeah.
disease. But what I'm asking more from you is, what is your feeling? A person who, they didn't connect to their intuition, or they had another voice that they followed instead,
Mhm.
but they've done it now. And now they're starting to realize that it was an error, so there's a lot of panics, there's suicides, there's all kinds of things happening. What I'm looking for, and I know there's doctors that have different formulas that help the immune system and all that, but I'm looking from the energetic, spiritual, it may not be physical thing they need to do, but
Yeah.
what is I feel like it's not hopeless. I
No, I
don't
don't think it is. I don't think it is either.
know.
I feel, and I think I know where you're going with this. It's like, I feel there's a lot that people could do to support and help themselves so they don't go down, I call the rabbit hole of it
Yeah,
being a bad thing,
right.
because it's fear. It's basically what it is. It's just like they just go down the whole rabbit hole of being in fear.
Yeah,
And you know what? We know the acronym FEAR, false evidence appearing real.
yeah,
It's not, it may not be that,
yeah,
but yet with the law of attraction, whatever you're focusing on, you're going to create. So it's a very thin line.
yeah,
So where are they? Are they living in fear, or are they living in love and appreciation? Okay. From a spiritual component, fear is a very low vibrating frequency,
mhm,
whereas love and appreciation is higher vibrating.
yeah,
Okay. Anything they could do energetically to raise their frequency.
right.
Okay. So it's not a match, it's a mismatch. It'll be ships passing in the night, right?
Yeah,
So anything they could do, yeah, take care of your physical body, feed it, nourish it, water it,
hmm,
listen to your body,
hmm,
go where it's directing you to, because your body will tell you what you need next.
yeah.
Okay?
And
And don't, it's like learning how to have a relationship with your body and
yeah,
yourself,
yeah, yeah. No, I think
right?
so. And maybe on the emotional level too. I mean, what comes to me is, because some people say you have to ask forgiveness. No, no, no. You can basically say, I made the decision. I honor that I made the decision with what I knew at the time.
Right.
And now it's done. And I'm, like I forgive myself if you're fighting against yourself, whatever.
Yeah. And
But
I
we're
think you
moving
you
on,
just
right?
you just nailed it. It's just like the only person you need to forgive is yourself,
Yeah. Yeah.
and having some mercy, because we are the hardest on ourselves,
Exactly.
you know.
Exactly.
We have a tendency to beat ourselves up. What are you saying to yourself?
Yeah.
Those things are huge.
Yeah.
If we look at the work of Dr. Masaru Emoto, remember him? He was the
Yeah. Yeah.
one that used to label water
Water.
and
Yeah.
stuff. He
Yeah.
passed away, I think, almost 10 years ago. Awesome man. And if our human body is at least 75% water,
Yeah.
and we're labeling this vessel, unworthy,
Yeah.
idiot, whatever, what is that doing to your body? What is
Yes.
it doing to the water? It's changing it.
Yeah.
So we need to be kinder to ourselves.
Yes.
You know, we need to learn how to become our own best friend, because believe it or not, the longest relationship you're going to have in your life is the one you have with yourself. Uh,
Exactly.
yeah. So how's it going? Are you
Yeah.
treating it and loving it and
Yeah.
nurturing it and spending time with it and honoring it?
Yeah.
Probably not. And it's time to start doing that.
Yeah. No, and I think I'm so glad you stated that. It's sort of been my feeling, when people start waking up and now you realize they have terror in their eyes. It's like, and they listen to well-meaning people who have a sort of a biological approach to medicine.
Mhm.
And even a supplement approach, say take this. I mean, sure, maybe anti-inflammatories will help, maybe things to eat up the nanokinase, to eat up the spike, maybe, like, all these things are, but it has to be part of the bigger program of
Right.
helping yourself and saying, my body is made to heal. This little bioweapon attempt is not going to work, and I am stronger. I am bigger than this, and I think, yeah, I feel much more optimistic. I was myself terrified at all the people I knew that took it, including family members and that. And I cried so hard for you just to think what could happen. And then I realized I've got to stop this. Like everyone has their destiny and everyone can take charge at any point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what? And it's not my job to fix it for them.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the other one.
I have to honor their choices and support them in any way they choose, yet I can't fix it for them.
Yes.
Like they need to, I could give them tools, but they need to take that step further and make it their own and do it for themselves, because they will never, it'll be so empowering for them to have that experience. And I don't want to rob them of that experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, our time is up.
Oh
I
my
think
goodness.
I know. Is there something else that you would like to share? I mean, we ended up with this. It is the subject of the day, though.
It is the subject of the day. I think what I really want to say is this, we're all on a journey. It's not a destination. And we are in control. We have to start believing that and knowing that. And it's our innate right to have perfect health and wellness. And you may get to it through different venues than what we've been told is possible. So I feel that people can heal, I call, my tagline is healing in ways you never thought possible. So when you're open to possibilities, I think that's where the magic happens.
Well, thank you very much for
You're
sharing your
welcome.
knowledge, your wisdom, your years of experience. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Maron.
Thank you for joining us at the Healers Café with Dr. Manon.